At 7:23 on the morning of October 14, 1968, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood in his Lenox Avenue apartment, watching through binoculars as three unmarked panel trucks rolled past West 116th Street. 61 years old, controlled Harlem's numbers racket for 30 years, one unbreakable rule: never sell to children. The Genovese family had 12 dealers pushing heroin outside junior high schools across Harlem. In the past 2 weeks, they had hospitalized 9 students with overdoses. 3 were in critical condition. 1 was 13 years old.
2 days earlier, Anthony Little Augie Pisano had sent Bumpy a message. The Italian mobster called him a hypocrite, said Bumpy's moral code was a joke for a man who ran illegal gambling, said if Bumpy interfered with their heroin operation, they would burn his policy banks and kill his collectors. To prove the point, they had beaten Miss Sarah Williams, a 54-year-old teacher at PS 153, with a lead pipe. Her crime: standing in the doorway to stop a dealer from entering school grounds. She was still in Harlem Hospital with a fractured skull.
Bumpy had built his empire on 3 principles: control the vice, protect the neighborhood, never touch the children. The Italians had violated all 3. But Bumpy Johnson did not survive 3 decades in Harlem by being impulsive. He did not control the most profitable numbers operation in New York by making mistakes. And he did not earn respect from men like Malcolm X and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. by solving problems with violence when intelligence worked better.
The heroin came into Harlem through a simple supply chain. Genovese family imported it through Red Hook, Brooklyn. Trucks transported it to a warehouse in the Bronx. From there, 3 panel trucks made deliveries every Monday and Thursday to 5 distribution points across Harlem. Each truck carried approximately 15 kilograms of pure heroin, divided into smaller packages. The street value was $2.3 million per delivery. The Genovese family had been running this operation for 8 months.
Bumpy knew every detail because he owned the drivers, not through intimidation, through economics. He paid them $500 per week each to tell him delivery schedules, routes, and package counts. The Genovese family paid them $200 per week and threatened to kill their families if they talked to anyone. Bumpy's approach was more effective.
If you want to see how a 61-year-old numbers runner defeated the Mafia without firing a single shot, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories of brilliant criminal strategy. Back to Bumpy.
The Genovese family believed Bumpy would retaliate with violence. They expected drive-by shootings, firebombs, street warfare. They had reinforced their distribution points with armed guards. They had put contracts out on Bumpy's top lieutenants. They were preparing for a war. Bumpy Johnson was planning something else entirely, something the Italians would never see coming, because it required patience, precision, and a deep understanding of how criminal organizations actually functioned.
On October 12th, Bumpy called a meeting with his 4 most trusted men: Willie the Chinaman Jeffries, who ran the policy banks in East Harlem; Junie Bird, who controlled the numbers operation in the Sugar Hill district; Nat Pettigrew, who managed collections in the South Bronx; and Clarence Sonny Chance, who handled enforcement. These men had worked with Bumpy for over 20 years. They had survived the Castellammarese War, the Commission's attempts to take over Harlem, and multiple attempts by other criminal organizations to muscle in on their territory.
Bumpy laid out the situation. The Genovese family was selling heroin to children. They had beaten the schoolteacher. They had threatened to destroy Bumpy's operation. The men expected orders to hit back hard, to kill the dealers, to burn the Genovese distribution points. Instead, Bumpy gave them a different assignment. He needed 90 pounds of all-purpose flour. He needed it delivered to a specific location in the South Bronx within 24 hours. He needed it separated into bags that exactly matched the size and weight of the heroin packages the Genovese family was distributing. The men were confused. Bumpy explained. The Genovese family had suppliers and customers. They purchased heroin from Corsican importers in Marseille. They sold it to distributors in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. Those distributors expected a specific product. If the product was wrong, If the heroin was cut too heavily, or if the quality was inconsistent, the distributors would assume the Genovese family was cheating them. In the heroin business, cheating your customers was a death sentence. Bumpy's plan was elegant. On Thursday, October 14th, the 3 Genovese panel trucks would leave the Bronx warehouse at 7:15 a.m. for their regular delivery run to Harlem. They would travel down Jerome Avenue, across the McCombs Dam Bridge, and into Harlem via 155th Street. The route took them through a section of the South Bronx where Bumpy's organization controlled the streets. The trucks would be stopped, not robbed, not attacked, just stopped for exactly 47 minutes while Bumpy's people made a substitution. The heroin packages would be removed, the flour packages would be inserted. The trucks would continue to their delivery points in Harlem. The Genovese dealers would receive their shipments and distribute them to street-level sellers. Those sellers would cut the product and package it for individual sales. And within 72 hours, the Genovese family's major customers in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington would discover they had received worthless white powder instead of heroin. But Bumpy's plan had a second layer. The real heroin would not be destroyed. It would be repackaged and sold through Bumpy's own distribution network to independent dealers who had been squeezed out by the Genovese operation. Bumpy would make a profit while simultaneously destroying the Genovese family's reputation and business relationships. The Italian mobsters would lose $2.3 million in product value, lose their major distribution customers, and potentially face retaliation from those customers who believed they had been deliberately cheated. Willie Jeffries raised a concern. If the Genovese family discovered the substitution before the trucks reached Harlem, Bumpy's people would be caught in the act. The drivers would be killed. The operation would be exposed. Bumpy nodded. That was why the substitution had to happen in exactly 47 minutes. Any longer, and the trucks would be late to their delivery points. The Genovese family would investigate. Any shorter, and the work would be sloppy. Mistakes would be made. Bumpy had already solved this problem. The trucks would be stopped at a specific location on Jerome Avenue at 7:31 a.m. The location was a narrow section of the street where a staged accident would block both lanes. A produce truck owned by one of Bumpy's front companies would be positioned to collide with a taxicab at exactly 7:31 a.m. The collision would be minor, but would require police response and traffic clearance. The 3 Genovese panel trucks would be trapped behind the accident. While police dealt with the staged accident, Bumpy's team would approach the panel trucks. The drivers, already on Bumpy's payroll, would unlock the rear doors. 8 men working in pairs would remove the heroin packages and replace them with flour packages. Each pair would handle 1 truck. The work would take 12 minutes per truck. With 3 teams working simultaneously, the substitution would be completed in 12 minutes. The remaining 35 minutes would be consumed by the staged accident and traffic clearance. On the morning of October 14th, everything happened exactly as planned. At 7:31 a.m., the produce truck collided with the taxicab on Jerome Avenue. The 3 Genovese panel trucks stopped behind the accident. 2 NYPD patrol cars arrived at 7:34 a.m. While officers took statements and documented the collision, Bumpy's teams worked behind the panel trucks. 12 minutes later, 45 packages of heroin had been removed and replaced with 45 packages of flour. The trucks contained $2.3 million worth of white powder that would not produce any high whatsoever. At 8:18 a.m., police cleared the accident scene. The panel trucks continued to their delivery points in Harlem. By 9:45 a.m., all 5 Genovese distribution points had received their shipments. The dealers inspected the packages, saw white powder, assumed it was heroin, and distributed it to their street-level sellers. None of them tested the product. They had been receiving shipments from the same source for 8 months. They had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. The genius of Bumpy's plan was the delay. The flour would not reach end customers for another 24 to 48 hours. Street-level dealers would cut it with lactose and quinine, the standard cutting agents for heroin. They would package it into individual doses. They would sell it to users, and those users would discover they had purchased worthless powder. But by then, the trail would be cold. The users would complain to street dealers. Street dealers would complain to distributors. Distributors would complain to the Genovese family. But the Genovese family would have no idea where the substitution had occurred.
However, the real disaster would happen in Philadelphia. The Genovese family had a standing arrangement with the Bruno family. Every Thursday, 5 kilograms of heroin from the Harlem operation were diverted to Philadelphia. Angelo Bruno's organization distributed this heroin throughout Philadelphia and southern New Jersey. The Bruno family paid $400,000 per shipment. They expected a specific quality product. They tested every shipment before accepting delivery.
On Friday, October 15th, at approximately 2:30 p.m., Angelo Bruno's chemist tested the Thursday shipment. The result was catastrophic. The heroin was flour. Not heavily cut heroin, not low-quality heroin. Flour. Someone had deliberately substituted the product. Someone had tried to cheat the Bruno family out of $400,000. Angelo Bruno called New York immediately. He demanded an explanation from the Genovese family. The Genovese family had no explanation. They insisted the shipment was genuine. They accused Bruno of lying to avoid payment. This created a problem neither family could ignore. In organized crime, reputation is currency. If the Genovese family was selling fake heroin, no one would do business with them. If Angelo Bruno was lying about fake heroin to avoid paying, no one would trust him. One of them was lying. One of them had to be destroyed. The situation escalated at 4:17 p.m. on Friday when the Bruno family's second-in-command, Philip "Chicken Man" Testa, called Anthony Pisano directly. Testa was not diplomatic. He told Pisano that the Bruno family had tested the product 3 times. It was flour. Testa said if the Genovese family did not refund the $400,000 immediately, there would be consequences. Pisano responded that the Genovese family did not give refunds for imaginary problems. If Bruno wanted to claim the product was fake, Bruno needed to prove it. This was exactly what Bumpy Johnson had anticipated. Criminal organizations operated on trust and reputation. Once that trust was broken, violence was inevitable. The Genovese family could not admit they had been robbed because it would make them look weak. The Bruno family could not accept fake product because it would make them look stupid. Neither family could back down without losing face. They were locked in a conflict neither wanted but neither could avoid.
On Saturday, October 16th, at 11:23 a.m., the Bruno family sent a message. 2 Genovese family soldiers were found shot to death in a car near the Philadelphia Italian market. Both men had been involved in the heroin distribution operation. The message was clear. The Bruno family believed they had been cheated and were retaliating. The Genovese family had 2 options: admit they had been robbed and look weak, or assume Bruno was lying and retaliate.
Anthony Pisano chose retaliation. On Sunday, October 17th, 3 Bruno family associates were shot outside a social club in South Philadelphia. 1 died, 2 were hospitalized. The war had begun, and Bumpy Johnson had not fired a single shot. But Pisano had a second problem. The heroin that should have been delivered to Harlem was now flooding the streets through independent dealers. Dealers who had previously been shut out of the market were suddenly selling high-quality product at competitive prices. Users were switching suppliers. The Genovese family's street-level operation was collapsing. Dealers were complaining that customers were buying elsewhere. Revenue was dropping, and Pisano had no idea why. The answer was simple. Bumpy had taken the stolen heroin and distributed it through his own network. Not directly. Bumpy Johnson did not sell heroin. But Bumpy knew independent dealers who were willing to buy product at wholesale prices. Bumpy sold them the 45 packages of heroin for $1.8 million, a discount from the $2.3 million street value, but still profitable. Those dealers sold it to users. The Genovese family's customer base evaporated. By Monday, October 18th, Pisano was facing 3 simultaneous crises. The Bruno family was killing his soldiers in Philadelphia. His Harlem operation was losing customers to independent dealers, and his street dealers were reporting that the Thursday shipment had been fake. All of these problems seemed unrelated. Pisano did not connect them. He assumed the Bruno situation was a misunderstanding that had escalated. He assumed the independent dealers were just getting lucky. He assumed the fake heroin was a quality control problem with his supplier. Pisano never considered that all 3 problems had a single cause. He never suspected Bumpy Johnson, because Bumpy had not done anything visible. No shootings,
No robberies, no confrontations, just a 47-minute traffic delay on Jerome Avenue that nobody noticed. Pisano was fighting a war against the Bruno family, while his real enemy sat in a Lenox Avenue apartment reading the newspaper.
On Tuesday, October 19th, the commission intervened. Carlo Gambino, head of the Gambino family and the most powerful mobster in New York, called a meeting. Representatives from the 5 families gathered at a social club in Little Italy. The topic was the Genovese-Bruno conflict. Gambino wanted it stopped. Mob wars were bad for business. They attracted attention from law enforcement. They disrupted operations. Gambino demanded both families accept mediation.
The mediation revealed the truth. An independent chemist tested heroin samples from both the Genovese supply and the package delivered to Philadelphia. The Philadelphia package was flour. The Genovese supply was genuine. Someone had switched the product between the Bronx warehouse and Philadelphia. The question was, who?
Pisano immediately suspected the drivers. He had the 3 drivers brought to a warehouse in the Bronx on Wednesday, October 20th. He interrogated them personally. The drivers insisted they had delivered the genuine product. They had not stopped. They had not been robbed. They had not seen anything suspicious. Pisano did not believe them. He had all 3 drivers killed. This was his second mistake. The drivers were the only witnesses to the Jerome Avenue incident. With them dead, Pisano had eliminated his only lead.
Bumpy Johnson learned about the drivers' deaths within 2 hours. He had expected it. Criminal organizations always looked for traitors when operations went wrong. The drivers knew the risks. Bumpy had paid their families $10,000 each in advance. Those families were relocated to Detroit before the bodies were found. This was not mercy. This was business. Bumpy took care of the people who worked for him. That loyalty was why his organization functioned better than the Italians.
By Thursday, October 21st, 1 week after the substitution, the Genovese family's heroin operation in Harlem was effectively destroyed. They had lost their major customer in Philadelphia. They had lost street-level market share to independent dealers. They had killed their own drivers based on suspicion. And they had started a war with the Bruno family that was costing them soldiers and money. Anthony Pisano's reputation within the Genovese family was damaged. He had been outmaneuvered by someone, but he did not know who. The commission's mediation required the Genovese family to pay the Bruno family $200,000 in compensation for the fake heroin and the killed soldiers. This was less than the full $400,000 Bruno had demanded, but it was still a significant loss. More importantly, it was a public admission that the Genovese family had failed to control its own product. In the mob, that kind of failure was fatal to your reputation.
Pisano made one final attempt to salvage the situation. On Friday, October 22nd, he sent a message to Bumpy Johnson requesting a meeting. Pisano wanted to negotiate. He suspected Bumpy was involved somehow, but he had no proof. He needed to stop the bleeding. He was willing to make concessions. Bumpy agreed to meet at a neutral location, a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan.
The meeting took place on Saturday, October 23rd at 2 p.m. Pisano arrived with 2 bodyguards. Bumpy arrived alone. They sat in a back booth. Pisano was direct. He knew Bumpy had something to do with the Philadelphia situation. He wanted to know how it happened. Bumpy smiled and said he had no idea what Pisano was talking about. Bumpy was a numbers runner. He knew nothing about heroin. Pisano changed tactics. He said the Genovese family was willing to stop selling heroin in schools. They would focus on adult customers only. They would leave the children alone. In exchange, Bumpy would stop interfering with their operations. Bumpy considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said no. The Genovese family had violated Harlem. They had beaten a schoolteacher. They had poisoned children. There would be no deals. They would leave Harlem entirely or face continued problems. Pisano's face went red. He leaned across the table. He said Bumpy was making a mistake. The Genovese family had resources Bumpy could not match. They had soldiers. They had connections. They could destroy Bumpy's numbers operation with one phone call to the right people. Bumpy finished his coffee. He stood up. He looked at Pisano and said something that became legendary in Harlem criminal circles.
You made the mistake of thinking this was a negotiation. It's not. You're done in Harlem. You just don't know it yet."
Bumpy left the restaurant. Pisano sat in the booth, furious, humiliated, but also aware that he had no good options. He had already lost the war. The Genovese family's heroin operation in Harlem was gone. Their reputation was damaged. Their relationship with Philadelphia was destroyed. All because Bumpy Johnson had switched 45 packages of heroin with 45 packages of flour.
Over the next month, the Genovese family quietly withdrew from Harlem's heroin trade. They redirected their operations to other boroughs. They rebuilt their relationship with the Bruno family through concessions and payments. And they never attempted to sell drugs near schools again. Not because they had developed morals, because they had learned that some men could not be threatened. Some men fought wars without firing guns, and some men protected their neighborhoods with intelligence instead of violence. Miss Sarah Williams recovered from her injuries. Bumpy Johnson paid her medical bills anonymously. She returned to teaching at PS 153 in December 1968. The 9 students who had overdosed all survived. The dealers who had sold to them disappeared from Harlem. Some moved to other cities. Some were found in the Hudson River. The details were never clear, but the message was understood. Children were off limits. Bumpy Johnson never admitted his role in the Genovese-Bruno War. He never claimed credit for destroying Pisano's heroin operation. He continued running his numbers racket until his death from a heart attack in 1968, just 2 months after the flour substitution. He died at 62, having controlled Harlem's illegal gambling for over 30 years. He was respected by his community, feared by his enemies, and remembered as a man who had principles in a business that usually had none. The story of the flour substitution became a legend in Harlem. Young hustlers told it to each other as an example of how to think instead of react. The lesson was simple. Violence is expensive, obvious, and invites retaliation. Intelligence is cheap, invisible, and devastating. Bumpy Johnson had defeated a mafia family with 90 pounds of flour and the understanding that in organized crime, reputation matters more than firepower. Anthony Pisano never recovered from the disaster. He was demoted within the Genovese family in 1969. By 1971, he was running a small bookmaking operation in New Jersey. He was shot and killed in 1974 during a dispute over gambling debts. The official story said it was a robbery. People in Harlem knew better. Pisano had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated Bumpy Johnson. In Harlem, that mistake was fatal. The 3-panel trucks continued making deliveries around New York for another decade. Different cargo, different routes, different owners. None of them ever traveled through the South Bronx again. The drivers who had been killed were buried in unmarked graves. Their families received monthly payments for years from an anonymous benefactor. The flour that had been used for the substitution was purchased from a wholesale bakery supply company in Queens. The owner never knew what his product was used for. He never asked. The real heroin that Bumpy had stolen was sold through independent dealers and eventually consumed by users across Harlem, the Bronx, and parts of Brooklyn. It kept those dealers in business for 3 months. It disrupted the Genovese family's market share permanently, and it proved that in the drug trade, controlling supply was more powerful than controlling territory. If this story hit different than you expected, do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Every like tells YouTube this is the kind of forgotten criminal history that people need to hear. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're digging up untold stories of criminal masterminds who changed history without ever pulling a trigger. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. New York? Chicago? Are you international? Let us know. And tell us, what other stories of criminal genius do you want to hear? Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping Bumpy Johnson's legacy alive. These men operated in the shadows, but their strategies changed the game forever.